Welcome to the Crypto and Blockchain Talk.
Hello.
Hey.
Guten Tag.
Aloha.
Hola. Shalom.
Hello.
Namaste.
Ni hao.
Privet.
Hello.
Salut. Yassas.
Salve.
Ciao.
Bonjour. Our podcast talks about the latest trends in the worlds of cryptocurrencies and the blockchain.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Crypto and Blockchain Talk. And this week with me, I have none other than Jonathan Dunsmoor, founder and principal of Dunsmoor Law. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello, Aviva. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming on to our beautiful podcast. Well, there's a couple of things I want to talk to you about. And the first thing I want to address with you is this latest news that now Coinbase, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be laughing so early in the show. So basically Coinbase says now that they're allowing general users to use USDT on their platform. Now let's just do a little synopsis here. Let me just do a little ease into this subject because you see, Tether and also their Hong Kong-based exchange, which of course is Bitfinex. And if anyone here wants any information on these things, there's prior podcasts we have done on this. But anyway, Tether and their Hong Kong-based exchange, Bitfinex, have had their share of time, not just in the papers or on websites. Well, I should say papers. We're talking legal papers, folks, because they have been in some pretty interesting legal battles. I think the latest one was in New York with the New York Attorney General's office, and that was resolved with a settlement in February of this year. And it's been mired by claims for forever that Tether isn't really backed by adequate reserves. And I even drew Jonathan's attention to an article that was written in CoinDesk, where the article is talking about their attestation, which they have had to legally do as part of this legal settlement from that case that we just mentioned in the state of New York. They did publish this attestation verifying that they had 35 billion in assets to back their 35 billion equivalent in USDT. But then when you go down to the very bottom of this article, the article I was referring Jonathan to, the first issuing of this article was at 3 o'clock, March 30th at 3 o'clock. And then not even 5 hours later, there was an update. And the update at the bottom of the article says, they've removed the phrase "in the bank" from the first paragraph because it was meant colloquially. But as noted later in the article, the composition of Tether's assets, it's not spelled out in the attestation. So this attestation that they gave in February is the equivalent of the toilet paper in my bathroom. I don't even know how to say this without using all the proper terminology. And I know that in a minute, Jonathan's going to do his famous disclaimer. So I'm already getting ahead of him. As you can hear him laughing, I'm already getting ahead of him. Allegedly, they don't have enough money to back their USDT. But it is interesting that Coinbase would make this move knowing that it's also the case that USDT trading is not going to be available on all regions, by all regions that are covered by the exchange. So I just don't even understand how that's going to work. And even going forward, where you know that Tether definitely has the attention of the authorities in the U.S. financial departments, like in the SEC and in the CFTC. It's actually quite interesting that Coinbase took this position. But also on top of it, Coinbase also said they're only supporting the Ethereum-based version of USDT, and they're not offering the versions that are offered on Tron, Justin Sun's Tron, and on Blockstream's Liquid. So, without further ado, and I know that disclaimer's coming, Jonathan, go for it.
Everything that Aviva and I discuss in this podcast is not legal advice, not investment advice, and not financial advice. All of this is allegedly occurring, and This is for educational and informational purposes only. Do your own research.
Amen.
Amen.
On that note, Jonathan, I mean, don't you think there's so many concerns, over USDT's US dollar backing? And Coinbase on April 14th of this year, 2021, in case you need reminding, they went public on the NASDAQ exchange. And, I don't even know what their valuation is at this moment. I mean, it is in the billions, though. I mean, every article, though, I read, it was something different. It was everywhere from 60 billion to 100 billion, but it looks like now they've settled that it has an $85 billion valuation. So they've just listed. And of course, we know from my last podcast, Coinbase themselves has had some legal problems where the CFTC has actually slapped them on the wrist and also on the ass. And if you want more information about that, you can obviously listen to last week's podcast. But it's a little bit strange that Coinbase would actually go out there with this kind of strategy, which I would say is a kind of risky one. And look, I know that USDT has its place in the market, but there's a lot of stable coins. There's a lot of stable coins out there. So, Jonathan, what is your take on this?
I think that Tether doing what Tether did was revolutionary, right? I was one of the biggest skeptics when it came to, the use of a stable coin and how to keep it stable and all of those metrics. And there's some really good arguments on why and how Tether may not be as stable as it is allegedly in these, affirmations. And so I think for Coinbase, especially since they're basically now this big, massive, publicly traded giant, they've got a lot of wiggle room. Of course, still have to report to their shareholders and they're subject to SEC jurisdiction. But for the most part, as long as everybody's kind of got their slaps on the wrist, especially, from the early ICO days or whatever kind of trouble that someone has gotten in, it looks like the regulators are like, if you've paid your fine and moved on, they don't really care about it anymore. So I do think it's going to be interesting to see how supposedly New York DFS is able to keep Tether off of people's balance sheets. And we know that's all a little bit of hocus pocus. But I think that, overall for Coinbase and for Tether, ironically, it's a really good move. I think they've got a market cap of exactly kind of what Coinbase is. So I think that, overall, it kind of puts everything in a really kind of unique light where you have a publicly traded company looking at, adding an asset that has been through some fire and still has some skepticism. In my mind, I think that if there was a run on Tether, those numbers really wouldn't be there. I think that there's not those dollars to back it up because, as Nick pointed out in his CoinDesk article, they're not backed in a bank. There's not a bank that can be audited. And I think that, overall, when it comes to some of these new custodian solutions, especially with US Bank and some of these bigger guys coming into this space, it's going to become a question of, one, do they allow access, almost portal address or a blockchain-based address to audit in real time how many dollars are actually in that bank account? Or does it become something where Tether kind of goes away and we're looking at, possibly the last reach of not only the centralized exchanges and stable coins, because the DEXs and the CBDCs are coming through and starting to kind of evolve blockchain into, Web3 and blockchain, probably 2.0 or 3.0, depending on who you ask.
Going back to what you just said about how these fines don't really seem to mean anything anymore. Fines now from any U.S. authority against these kinds of companies, they're just not a deterrent because, as I already alluded to when we discussed this on a prior podcast, the CFTC ordered, it wasn't even a month prior to their listing on the stock exchange, they ordered Coinbase to pay $6.5 million US for false, misleading, and inaccurate reporting and wash trading. Yeah, I mean, the fact that you can kind of do that, which does suggest, and I'm trying to use the proper legal terms here, it does suggest that these would not be the kinds of people you would want to be listing on a nationally recognized or internationally recognized stock exchange where the minions like you and me go and invest our money, especially when they've already been told, hey, listen, You're not allowed to be giving false, misleading, or inaccurate reporting. Pay a $6.5 million. Thank you. Now you can go list. If it was the average Joe or Joanna, they'd be doing years behind bars, for this kind of thing. And I just don't get it.
I do think there is, some questions into, kind of what all kind of happened around the settlement, but it looked like it was something where, for better or worse, at the time there was the final showdown, right? And that's kind of what regulators look for, is they want to have that scalp and make sure that company is compliant, right? And so they got hit with I think it was $18.5 million fine because they did misrepresent some things, right? But then at the end of it, they had the money in the bank. At that point, it probably wasn't a bank because the regulators were looking after it. And that's ultimately what kind of led to the resolution of this. And since then, Tether's just been on a rip, and I think it's gained $30 billion just this year alone. And when you look at the totality of it, it's really kind of not only proven the stablecoin CBDC model, but it's also proven the true utility of having these things on chain, but in a better 2.0 format. So if you think of Tether as stablecoin 1.0, CBDCs and, possibly better auditable or affirmed bank accounts, especially on-chain bank accounts, right?
Right.
Could be really something that is a real glimpse into the future of our entire kind of industry. If I was able to go to and log on basically to see a read-only view of Tether's bank account to verify that, they had the, I think, $54 million in quote-unquote dollars or some type of dollars worth of value there, I think that would add more reliability and more stability to, Tether. And I think more people would be able to adopt it. But, overall, crypto newbies, right, that don't really understand the stablecoin and don't understand, how it could benefit them and how, transaction validity is definite. So where you have price fluctuations with traditional cryptocurrency, you can go buy a house or you can go buy a car, you can make a large purchase and not worry about by the time it gets there, something has happened and Bitcoin has fallen or Litecoin or Ethereum has gone, crazy and all of a sudden the gas fees have gone up and you're getting kind of robbed or the Dogecoin and Elon Musk has tweeted out about it. And,
Jesus.
Those kind of things. So yeah. I think this shows the model, and I think that overall, Tether did some really wild things, and I think that they did get their hand caught in the cookie jar a little bit. But I think overall, $18 million and being number 4 or 5 on the charts and a world-recognized stablecoin is not a bad lead.
This is why I love having you on here. I love these debates. I really love these debates. This is why you are literally one of my dearest BFFs.
The feeling's mutual.
Well, I just get so worried when I see that they're going big time. They are going large on their printing. Their printing goes crazy. On one particular day, actually, I was talking about Tether and I looked it up, and they had printed 65 million US dollars. Yeah, it really concerns me, Jonathan, because these guys are seriously printing this money without a care. It is just, it is like running through the fields, picking daisies, throwing them in the air. These guys are printing this money like no one's business. And because it can be used the way that you said, these guys literally have the keys. They have the golden keys to the city. They have more than the golden keys to the city. They have the keys to their own personal vaults. And they just keep printing this money. And, they even said that according to their own mouths, which again is kind of like laughing in the face of everything that's happening, Tether said in a tweet that they issued that they're growing by 10 billion US dollars a month. Okay. That means they're going to be worth at least 100 billion by the end of this year. It doesn't take a genius to do that math. So, if they're claiming to be able to back those with dollars in reserve, then we should be able to see somewhere, you and I, especially with transparency, $100 billion somewhere by December 1st of 2021. Now, this is just very interesting to me because I would like to really see this, especially after what happened in New York. New York state officials actually accused Tether and Bitfinex of allegedly, is that the right place to use the word, Jonathan, covering up these massive financial losses, as well as also saying you don't have these US dollars somewhere stashed in a mattress or anywhere else to back your tethers. So,
that's the important distinction, though.
Okay.
And it is worrisome, right? But it's kind of like robbing the bank, right? And then when when the cops get there, there's no money to be found and the money's back at the bank, right? There's arguably no crime committed. My legal theorists and colleagues will disagree on that. But the question is, what wrong has been committed? And absolutely, was there a misrepresentation or something that arguably definitely needs to be remedied, right? But what we're building, and I think in the totality of it makes sense, right, is whatever standard we hold to Tether, we should hold to a CBDC or what evolution of that comes,
Of
because,
course.
we want to know and see the public address to make sure that those dollars are there. Now,
we should.
The economists and some of the more financially literate people will also recognize that for the Fed, they get to move those numbers, right? But when it comes to, what is probably going to be ultimately an American CBDC, since we don't have a true centralized bank, right? We have this collaboration of really semi-quasi-governmental Federal Reserves, we're going to see something where I think it's going to really kind of push the technology into a new, really novel space of saying, okay, how are these different things kind of approved and what does that look like kind of on chain? And when that kind of goes through, whether it's through a CBDC that is only kind of controlled by the banks, kind of like Quorum and JP Morgan's new thing, that's something completely different than kind of a customer to customer kind of thing. And I think that, overall, it's going to be something where there's different kind of evolutions of this. But I think that from the very primitive of it, from the very understanding and foundational elements, what we should start off with is the lessons from Tether. And so if we can build from those Tether cases and what mistakes Tether has made and whether their bank account is auditable by independent third parties and possibly, like I said, verifiable by some type of on-chain mechanism or something far more creative than I am as a non-technologist. I think that's where we start really kind of creating reliability within, the world, right? And so if a country, whether it's a small country or a large country, says that, we're issuing a CBDC, well, we get to see, how much of that is available and what's in reserves and is it collateralized or backed by anything? If we have a client who's doing a gold-backed asset, right? Those assets are going to be verified by an independent third party that says that gold is there. But could those numbers be fudged by an American central bank or Fort Knox lie and say that there's, an extra billion or something? Absolutely. But that's where we start really kind of moving forward in this entire industry of saying, okay, this first iteration was maybe not as perfect, right? I think that we're going down the right path. And I think that like everything in this space, sometimes there's some hiccups, sometimes there's some boo-boos, sometimes somebody runs afoul of a regulator or two. The idea is that we as an industry and we as a collective community that understands and appreciates blockchain and cryptocurrency are able to help kind of the next generation of those that are in that space evolve from that. And I think Tether has, for better or worse, done that.
When I was looking at CoinMarketCap at some point during the week, there was something like $41 billion of Bitcoin which changed hands over a 24-hour period. At the same time, there was 87 billion Tether transactions. Now, Tether, of course, has this market cap, which at that time was, I don't know, it was around 50-something billion. They saw twice as much volume than Bitcoin did, which has a market cap of 1.1 trillion. Yeah. So
yeah.
It's just, it's kind of interesting because it does show in some ways a very concrete link between Tether fueling the Bitcoin price. This volatility in Bitcoin is constantly shadowed when it's on the uprise to this massive printing of tethers.
No, I agree. I think that, the overall space, right, has a lot of really weird early kind of, like I joked that, we're coming into like our teenage years, right? But because our last kind of couple years have been really trying to figure out how this technology is going to work and is it feasible to put stocks and bonds and everything on a blockchain? And for the most part, it is. And so Bitcoin has its utility. Bitcoin is always going to be that, digital gold, right? And that utility is there. But there's a real question about, moving the evolution of it on. And like I said, if you're going to make a big purchase or you're going to do, even just a basic transaction of a couple $1,000s, you don't want that price to collapse or even, someone to get over on you by it raising, 10, 15, 20 percent by the time it gets there. And we've seen those kind of cases in this infancy of cryptocurrency. And so the stablecoin model has been proven. And I think Tether, for better or worse, and for, whatever regulatory battles they've had and still probably have ahead of them in some cases, I think they've done good for the industry. I think overall it's proven the model, which in some ways we all owe a debt of gratitude.
Well, let's all hope from your mouth to someone's ears, because if this goes bad, it's going to go very bad. It will literally be the scene from the Kingsman in the church. I mean, it will be that.
So if it does go bad, right, if for some reason there's some terrible calamity and all of a sudden all the dollars are gone or all the alleged dollars are gone, that kind of gives us another kind of learning experience of, where and how to control these assets, right? And I think that's where, as this entire kind of real world versus, digital crypto world starts colliding, we've got to figure out ways of doing these type of verifications in the real world. And for better or worse, that's going to take some really, really smart people, probably either running afoul of the law or running close to regulators or, some type of crazy situation, which is why, the sandboxes that we have around the world are going to be really important for the evolution of those things, because as FinCEN has recently kind of declared, they're keeping an eye on this stuff. They're looking at it, for money laundering and all this other kind of fun stuff that can, happen with cryptocurrency. And you don't want that to be the negative association with the industry just because some bad apples are doing bad things, which happens in any industry. You can't really kind of bring that back to the entire crypto sphere.
I'm not saying this is further proof, but, the New York Stock Exchange is owned by ICE. ICE owns the NYSE, and ICE is short for the Intercontinental Exchange. Now, I know you know this news, and I'm not, like I said, maybe this is just, I don't know, someone's thinking a little ahead, but, they sold, it's not really directly related to Tether, I should say, but the NYSE participated in Coinbase's Series C 75 million funding round, okay? So they're one of the initial investors into Coinbase. A couple of days ago, they sold their 1.4% stake in Coinbase, which was only just listed. You'd think that they'd hold on. I mean, they sold it for $1.2 billion, and like I said, they participated in the funding round when it was only in the millions. So yeah, they've made their coin, they've made their change. They've said thank you very much and walked off into the distance. But I mean, for a company to just list and then have the owners of the New York Stock Exchange say, hey, we're out now. We're done. I mean, is it nothing to see her folks keep moving? Or is that like really a normal call that an investor would make, knowing that they've only just listed? And I mean, if you have confidence in a product, I mean, you keep holding, you wouldn't dump all that right away. I mean, they haven't even held on to that thing for more than a week. They waited until it was listed and then dumped it. So, I mean, I find all of this just really super interesting because, I love a good mystery.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that, the IPO pop is real, right? Because that's one of the problems with the capital markets is, especially in the U.S., is that, accredited investors are only able to participate because, supposedly, according to Congress, they're the only ones smart enough to learn how to invest their money properly without losing their ass, while the average Joe or Joanne, I think you said, can go, mortgage their house and go put it all on red or black on the roulette table and lose it all there in an instant. So I think, what this SEC has done and these commissioners have recognized with the most updated rule change is, the use of this broker-dealer exemption to kind of allow for that. And as more, quote unquote, non-accredited investors or non-rich folks get in through exemptions like that, I think that the capital markets are going to become more diversified and more utilitarian and economically advantageous for everyone. That being said, I do think that there is, possibly a good reason that ICE has taken the position of liquidating their shares, because I think I think the sexes of the world, the centralized exchanges, are in their end times. This is my own personal belief. I don't necessarily share this belief with everybody, but I do think that there's a real question of if the banks, who are far more powerful than the centralized exchanges, right, enter this market and are able to custody crypto assets, what happens there? And from the most part, right, in the U.S. at least, a bank is exceptionally powerful, so they don't have to go get all the money transmitter licenses in the same kind of form and fashion in which the centralized exchanges have to. And then there's a question of, the securities related aspects of the investment banks and what they're able to do with dark pools and all these kind of other kind of crazy opportunities when you start putting securities on a blockchain. And so I think ICE sees that. I think they recognize that while Coinbase is probably not going to go away, I think that there is going to be a time in which probably in the next couple of years that Coinbase is acquired by a very big fish. Who knows what that price can be. But as we've seen with the rise of Uniswap and other DEXs, coming through, those are going to be opportunities where you don't really need a centralized exchange. You need an onboarding ramp for the fiat. But assuming that you don't have a condition in which you need fiat on and off, right? And I pay that person in Tether, for example, then they can go to a decentralized exchange and put that into almost anything they want. And so I think that's a really kind of unique opportunity for the future and maybe something that ICE took a very long, hard look and said, is now the highest Coinbase is going to be? Maybe not, but there's a good argument that says there's a lot of really heavy-hitting competitors that are coming up on its tail.
I actually do agree. And by the way, I'm sitting here laughing. I love when you come on here and you go, I don't tell many people this. It's a freaking popular podcast. There's 100,000 unique listeners.
Well,
100,000 unique listeners are listening to this thing. And you're going, well, I don't really tell many people, but I'll only tell you specific
I only
group.
tell the people on the podcast. This is our
I love
100,000
it.
closest
Folks,
friends.
you heard it here
Yeah.
first. It's breaking news. Okay.
Our friends at the CFTC and SEC and FinCEN and all the ones that listen to this.
I love them, man. I'm a big listen, love me or hate me for it. I know the SEC and the CFTC and all those governmental agencies, they're like Marmite. Love them or hate them, and I'm a fan. They know I'm a fan. I'm a fan of them. They're a fan of me. Hey, we all love each other. It's a big love fest. At the end of the day, what ICE did say, or at least Scott Hill, who is the CFO of ICE, he basically said that after tax, the sale of the shares in Coinbase that they did have only generated them a paltry $900 million US, and those proceeds were used to pay down debt, which I think is a load of tosh. But anyway, we will now happily skip on to the next topic. There's been an article which came out recently. I can't remember which day. So a former financial regulator said the U.S. needs to step up their research into a CBDC. The digital dollar has been talked about since God was a boy at this point. I mean, this thing, it's like beating a dead horse, and I know that's a horrible thing to say, but by God, either crap or get off the pot, people. I mean, okay, so basically Christopher Giancarlo, who ran the CFTC, or the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, who, by the way, I'm a big fan of if you listen to the show, which I know you do, so I'm a big fan. I know that just a little butt kiss in there. So anyway, Christopher Giancarlo was the chairman from 17 to 19, that's 2019. And he was working with a consulting firm on some pilot programs to test different use cases for the digital dollar in the U.S. Now, I'm going to just tell you that there's a lot of these little silo think tanks for the digital dollar or working groups, and they all are doing different things. One hand isn't talking to the other hand. The right isn't talking to the left. Nobody knows what is happening. And so this project is now, China's already come out with their CBDC. They're like in phase 50, You got places around this globe who are just getting into this whole crypto sphere. They're way ahead of the United States. You even have tiny countries. It's the Bahamas. They have the sand dollar. Even they could manage to get 5 people together in a room and go, we're going to do this. And then they went and they hired this amazing company from Singapore who actually then went and did it. And they're still talking about this thing. Now, the U.S. does find itself lagging on almost front, especially compared to Europe in terms of payment infrastructure. And even Mexico allows users to transact in digital ways using QR codes and God only knows what, that I don't know why we have struggles. It's literally like a third world country in the United States. Why they have struggles. And so really that's, Jonathan, maybe I should be blaming you. But the whole thing is that it's, I don't really get this article because the article is about how the U.S. is falling behind. The U.S. isn't falling behind. It's always, the article should say the U.S. is always behind, not falling behind. And by the way, I say this with love, just in case the SEC and the CC are listening. So on that note, what do you have to say about that?
I do think that, overall there is a real interesting question of, how these little states are able to move fast. Basically what it boils down to. We have Wyoming in the United States who is just ripping and roaring ahead, way faster than its comparative states like Colorado. And of course, the smaller, more agile, smaller geographical bodies are going to be able to move a lot faster than something that is a big, giant like the United States federal government, right? And so I think that as we discussed kind of earlier with Tether, it's really good to have the Bahamas and some of these smaller states or countries, really move forward and kind of move fast and break things, to steal Facebook's motto. I think that really kind of showcases what can and cannot be done, right? And so if there is something that happens with the sand dollar, God forbid, we're able to kind of learn from it. If there is something that happens with the Chinese yuan that, tracks you everywhere you go, there's things to learn from it. And especially from EFF, Electronic Frontiers Foundation, to try to figure out, what are ways that we can use a Monero-like coin so the federal government doesn't know where every dollar you spend goes, even though arguably they can go get a subpoena if they really deserve it and take a look at your bank records. And so in the totality of everything, I think that this is just that natural progression that we were talking about of having those people who are capable of moving fast and breaking things, letting them do such. And if they violate their own laws or they're able to change their own laws so quickly, then kudos to them. Let the victor go the spoils. But I think overall, just as, Tether and Coinbase and all of these other kind of guys and gals are going to realize there's a different generation coming, and they're going to have to figure out where that generational gap, fits within their company, because I don't think Tether is going to be around for the next, 5 or 10 years. Unless they change their business model. I don't think Coinbase is going to be around for the next 5 or 10 years unless they change their business model and become a bank or acquired by a bank, which I think is a greater likelihood, right? And so in those same kind of CBDC talks, you could have something like the sand dollar be the de facto brilliant way of doing it. Or you could have something as, Singapore has been working on something and of course, Japan has been playing around with something. It could be a combination of all of these. I think it's going to be a really kind of collaborative approach where you don't really necessarily want a digital yuan from China that's going to track you and see, where you're spending your money and what your social score is. Whereas you may want a Singapore Monero doesn't allow for any tracking, or a Switzerland Monero that doesn't allow for any tracking. That's where we start really kind of getting into some interesting kind of next level privacy concerns.
Well, okay, so you see, this is where it gets very interesting, this conversation, and boy, am I awake for this. Because, you see, they came out in the Financial Times. So Financial Times came out with a brilliant article, and the article, by the way, I should say this in a British accent, but I'm not going to. Why CBDCs will likely be ID-based. And let me tell you something. Let's just say I did live in the United States. Am I going to use the digital dollar to make my purchases, or am I going to use China's digital renminbi? Which one am I going to use? Of course I'm going to use China's, because according to this, the U.S. is going to be able to track every single purchase that's made when I'm using my digital currency. It's going to obviously, everything to do with anonymity has just gone through the window. And actually, it's gone through all the windows. And the thing is, they'll be able to see balances, and there's nothing stopping anyone. It's not that this is new, by the way. It's been a key topic of almost every discussion to do with CBDCs. ID or no ID, to be or not to be. It's always been that discussion. Boy, I could put that on a t-shirt. That's actually pretty good. But the whole point is that if it's ID based, I definitely think they're going to go that way, especially because the U.S. courts have also just authorized the IRS to seek identities of taxpayers who have used crypto. So federal court in the United States has just authorized the IRS to serve a John Doe summons on Kraken, which is a crypto exchange, looking for the identities of all U.S. taxpayers who have used cryptocurrency. That is just the first step in that direction, that if we're going to go towards CBDCs, then, I hate to tell you this, Jonathan, if you have a choice of using a CBDC and it's going to be the one within your own country where you pay taxes, or one that's out of country, you'll be using the one out of country because you won't care if you live in the United States and they know that you just bought 6 pairs of panties and some bras from Victoria's Secret for your girlfriend and not your wife. No one is going to care, but it's going to make a huge difference on how and whose CBDC is going to rise to the forefront, because I am standing also by my theory. And my theory is that China's CBDC is going to smack the ass out of everything, because I believe no one is really outside of China going to give a crap. Just like those people who are in China, who knows? Who knows what they're thinking? I'd love to speak to, if there's anyone who is right now using the CBDC from China, email me at education@savvydigital.com. We would love to bring you on here and find out how it's going and what your feelings are. But let me tell you, I just don't think that if you were going to choose a digital currency, a cryptocurrency to transact with, if you're living in the United States, I just don't see people being, I know that people are, they can lose their minds sometimes. In other words, they do stupid things, but I just can't see, Joe Schmo turning up, like I said, at Victoria's Secret to use his CBDCs for butt plugs. I don't see it happening. He's going to use his Chinese money, okay? Because he won't care.
I think it's highly unlikely that FinCEN or the federal government in the U.S. is going to allow the kind of infiltration of arguably any Chinese CBDC, but let alone something that is that kind of let's just say it's untrackable by our standards, right? And so I do think that there is a compelling argument to say Switzerland or some other island country says, hey, we can transact in our native currency, our native digital currency. I think that possibly raises some significant concerns. But as far as the IRS goes, there is one governmental agency, and any lawyer or any client who's had me knows that I don't mess with is the IRS. They took down Al Capone, and not to say that I'm in the group of Al Capone, but that is something where I hand it off to, some of the brilliant tax lawyers that we work with, because that is a very, very delicate matter. You've got to have somebody who knows their stuff. But that's a situation where, you have, as an American, a financial obligation to report your taxes anyway. You have to file your taxes if you have basically an American passport. The U.S. doesn't even have arguably as a powerful as passport as Singapore, Japan, or South Korea anymore. But overall, the access to a U.S. market or a U.S. kind of haven, if God forbid you need to be extradited, is something that people are willing to kind of put up with. And I think as the evolution of the IRS and the evolution of accounting, with the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen saying that it's an estimated $7 trillion that have been not collected over the past 10 years from very wealthy individuals. I think that kind of weird combination of everything is going to lead to more regulation, but more comprehensive use of technology to see who may be skirting the system. And so if you did go purchase something at Stories, I think that you're going to run into a lot of questions and concerns about when they see your American bank account has one of these possibly prohibited CBDCs.
I understand the legal aspects. I understand what's right and what's wrong. I also understand the human psyche. And I know how, like you know how, real people operate on a day-to-day basis. And everything is relative. You know, nefarious, it covers every shade of gray, white, and black on the spectrum. And Johnny surfing for his butt plugs versus, I don't know, somebody who wants to buy a cache of illegal weapons and ship them into the United States. These are like two totally different things. But I seriously don't see, regardless, if somebody has an issue with the transparency of that purchase, they're not going to give two monkeys about adhering to the laws of the U.S. and even the laws that might cover the use of what cryptocurrencies they're going to be using. Because you know, as well as I know, there's a shed load of U.S. citizens who are currently trading on platforms they shouldn't. There's a shed load of U.S. citizens who are currently engaging in ICOs and coin offerings that they shouldn't. This happens. And I think because it's money and people, when it comes to their money, people have very different and strong feelings about that. You know, they feel this is their money. They should be able to do whatever the hell they want with it and to hell with what anyone else thinks.
I think there's a strong Fourth Amendment right to that. And I think that, probably with some of the subpoenas and things that occurred in FinCEN and around financial regulations, has probably carved some of that out. And I know that, under the Patriot Act and Sarbanes-Oxley and all these Dodd-Frank, all these other kind of things, a lot of those things have been kind of clawed back, whether it's through brokerage accounts or all these other kind of, accounts that one may have. But I think, it boils down to, one, is it federally prohibitive, right? Like, drug running or human trafficking, or is it something that, is just frowned upon, right? They shouldn't invest in ICOs because they're not smart enough. They're not an accredited investor, and therefore they don't know what the hell to do with their money. Mm-hmm. I think those are two different arguments. I think that, absolutely every American deserves the right of privacy. I think that is 1,000% in the third, which is rarely mentioned, the Third Amendment, and the Fourth Amendment. I think I will go toe-to-toe with any constitutional scholar on that.
Well, you're talking to me, and I live in Europe, and we have the privacy over here. But go ahead.
You do. And I think that, in that totality of having everything on chain or everything on a private chain or everything on a private network and being validated, in some cases that's already done because of, the pandemic and the chain shortage and cash shortage here. Everybody's already using cards. So we're already being tracked in a way that I'm not sure is being readily accessible, right? Like it's not something where you could just punch in the Etherscan and see everything that I've bought at every store that I've gone through within, 7 to 8 minutes, or depending on clearing times, right? Or gas fees. And so I think, in the totality of it, it really matters of, does this person have the right to privacy without a subpoena? And I think that's what we're building towards with hopefully this next level of CBDCs, because quite frankly, I don't think that, what has been created right now has real big privacy considerations that a true CBDC should. It should be something that, is absolutely kind of take into consideration. We're not able to access this private chain of this private bank who may have issued their kind of own almost interdependent CBDC, right? Like, something that the banks kind of agree to use with each other with JP Morgan's, newest iteration? Or is it something where everybody's using the CBDC that is issued from this, kind of Federal Reserve network, and that's what's being traced down? And so I think these questions need to be answered. I think, a lot of the work that is being done by the folks in the U.S. trying to figure this out is exactly what should happen, and we should learn from the experiences and the mistakes that Tether has made.
I'll tell you who is learning. I need to have that, I think it's Star Wars, that, that music, dun, 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 dun.
You're going to
get
hit with a Copyright suit, be careful.
Hey, listen, I'm singing it, and it's off key. So there's no way they can prove it's the same tune. Okay, so Ripple, we're going to end on this. Ripple has just appointed. Now, we all know that I'm a Ripple girl in a Ripple world. So just because I said that, it doesn't mean you should go buy some. Don't buy anything that anyone ever tells you to buy. Do it because you've looked into it and you think for yourself that it's a good investment. And now I should say something funny like, or unless Elon Musk mentions it, but even that, don't frickin' do it. Just don't, you don't know what someone's intentions are when they are telling you to go and buy something. But on that thought, I am a Ripple girl in a Ripple world. Ripple has just appointed a former U.S. Treasurer to their board as they're amid this fight with the SEC. So they now have they keep adding these heavy hitters to their board. They are not playing. They ain't playing. I mean, they just added Rosie Rios, who's the 43rd Treasurer of the U.S., to join the board of directors. And, they've also got these other very high-powered hitters who are joining their firm. I can't remember what the names of them are. But the whole point is that they are appointing the people from within. They're literally grabbing the right people as they're battling this lawsuit from the SEC. It must be very interesting for, these people. They all know each other when they're sitting around that veneered, highly polished oak table that's 2,000 years old or whatever in whatever boardroom in Washington, D.C. They're looking over that table at people who they've worked with who are now working with cryptocurrencies, this dirty thing that they can't even get their head around. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. I'm always interested to see what the next move is going to be made. It's like a very slow but suspenseful chess game with Ripple, because there is going to be an end game kind of ending with this. And I think they might win. Is that weird for me to say? And by the way, SEC, I love you. Go on. Go on, Jonathan.
I mean, I think I think everybody wins ultimately. I think, dear regulators, as much as I give you grief, I think that overall these folks are trying to do the job that they are best suited for. And most of them aren't in this for the blood, sweat, and tears that we are. And they're not, quote unquote, kind of true believers to see what this stuff can be. Now, they may become true believers after somebody waves a bag of money after them, after they've retired from public service or whatever, or they may learn along the way and then become true believers. But I think in its, true utter sense, I think that if a regulator sees that company or individual is not behaving nefariously, not intentionally trying to harm the markets, and recognize that some of these rules were not as clear then as they are now. And I think that, some of the fines and figures, and we've argued over that for some of these podcasts, are indicative of, that maxim of, kind of do no harm. And if you do harm, this is the fine, kind of move on and continue with business, because you don't want to have a situation where, this let's take Tether, for example, a multi-billion-dollar asset that is used around the world, that is the foundational element to arguably CBDCs and making better for financial transactions and hopefully more transparent when it comes to who are the bad guys in terrorist financing, because any FBI agent or anybody in the CIA will tell you they love fiat way more than they love crypto. But, all of those things considered, I think that, I think you really have to take a look and see, is this person or entity trying to do criminal activity? And if the answer is no, then work with them, work with counsel, work within a sandbox, work with, what regulations and what laws we have to make this entire industry move forward. Because just as this silly bill has been proposed in New York with the banning of Bitcoin mining, that's the most ludicrous thing that I've ever heard in my life. And I'm a huge environmental proponent of sustainable good and all that kind of stuff. But to kind of banish an entire industry or the foundational element of an entire industry is absolutely nearsighted and bad for business, as well as bad for anybody who's trying to innovate and invent on that technology. So that's my piece.
Well, the last thing I'm going to ask you, because you said it now twice, so I've got to pull you up on this. So do you really honestly, in your heart of hearts, believe that Tether is the blueprint for CBDCs and not Bitcoin? Really?
I think in a lot of ways, everything, what is the Newton state? I stood on the shoulders of giants. That's the beautiful thing about this industry. And that's the, reason that I have blockchain believer in my titles and stuff, is because I do think that there is so many fundamental things in our society that are in need of trust. And we can't create it. We can't create it better than we can through technology, at least not right now. And so if we're able to, build on the back of Bitcoin, an 8 or 9 page white paper to hopefully creating a better financial system so we don't have to experience a great recession or any of those kind of crazy things again, then yeah, I think they're all built on the backs of each other. And maybe in this analogy, Bitcoin is the grandfather and Tether is the father. But yes, I do think that Tether has played a significant role, whether we like it or not, in the evolution of CBDCs and stablecoins.
Well, on that note, that's my laugh.
I can tell.
I don't think so. On that note, I would like to thank you so much, Jonathan, for coming on to this week's Crypto and Blockchain Talk.
Thank you so much for having me. Once again, everyone, I truly appreciate your time and listening to this. Dear regulators, I apologize if I threw anyone under the bus. And none of this has been for financial or investment or legal advice. This is all for educational purposes. And thank you so much for having me, Aviva.
Anytime and every time. I would like to thank everyone for tuning into this week's edition of Crypto and Blockchain Talk. Please do not forget to tell your friends and family to tune in to this beautiful podcast, which is now streamed on over 75, you heard it, 75 different podcasting platforms. And I'm not even going to start naming them. You just have to hunt them down. In addition, this podcast is going to be played on our sister radio station, which is Crypto 24 Radio. Again, that's Crypto 24 Radio. It is played 24/7, 365 around the world. On top of that, if you'd like to get in touch with us or if you want to give us some really beautiful comments, please do not hesitate to visit our social media platforms. We are on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you want to get those links, go on to the cryptoandblockchaintalk.com website and click on the icons. So to get in touch with us directly, our preferred method of communication is via email. So please email us at education@savvydigital.com. That's education@savvy, S-A-V-I-I digital.com. Again, thank you for tuning in. We really appreciate that you are taking your time to listen to us. We know that you have many things to do and you have a busy life. So when you give us your attention, you have no idea how grateful we are. Again, thank you for tuning in. Please be safe, take care, and goodbye for now.